Hey everyone, I'm back again with another episode of Gen Z Let's Talk. This episode is about climate change. In the late 1800s, the whole world was going through the Industrial Revolution. At the time, everything was powered by coal. Coal and crude oil are hydrocarbons, which are chains of carbon and hydrogen. When these chains combust, which is when they combine with oxygen from the atmosphere and heat, the links between the carbon break, releasing energy, and that carbon is then released into the atmosphere as CO2, carbon dioxide. So we had this coal, we were using it to power steam engines, railroads, and early industrial plants and machines, heaters, smokestacks, ovens. So all of that happened in the late 1800s. Around 1896, a group of scientists predicted that burning all of these fossil fuels would have some kind of impact on our climate. We didn't know what that was going to be at the time. We just knew that burning fossil fuels was going to change the amount of certain elements and molecules in our atmosphere. But we knew that it was going to do something. By the 1950s and 60s, after about half a century of burning fossil fuels, the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere increased. The greenhouse effect is when light from the sun enters Earth's atmosphere and is trapped in the atmosphere, increasing the temperature of Earth. That's what makes Earth habitable. If you go to Mars, their atmosphere is so thin that the surface of Mars is very, very cold. These greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, H2O, methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone, are all greenhouse gases that are also released when we burn fossil fuels. As the 20th century went on, the amount of greenhouse gases increased, and so did the amount of light trapped in the atmosphere by the greenhouse effect. There's a lot of misinformation about climate change, claiming that it's part of the natural cooling and warming cycle of the Earth that happens once every 10,000 years, but that's been disproven. Even when you account for cooling and warming cycles of the Earth, the rate at which the Earth is warming is exponentially faster than it should be given all climate models of the Earth's previous temperatures. There's also another piece of misinformation that's been spread by Russian scientists or propagandists, whatever you want to call them, that the sun is outputting more solar flares and light and energy than it has in the past, which again is at best a partial truth. The sun did output slightly more light between the time of about 1900 to 1950 and then stabilized. But even when you account for this, it doesn't prove that climate change is a hoax. Climate change is real. The greenhouse effect is real. Releasing carbon and carbon dioxide and these other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere increases the surface temperature of Earth. We knew this. All of this research was published a long time ago, as early as 1960. In 1977, Exxon, which was and is the largest oil company in the world, also knew that climate change was real. And they knew that if this information got out to the public, that it would mean the end of their business, right? The end of oil being the most profitable business in the world. And it was, and it still is. So Exxon has to come up with a plan. They know that they're responsible for a lot of things happening in the climate that aren't positive, because burning fossil fuels also pollutes the air, pollutes water, causes greenhouse gases to be emitted into the atmosphere, which have all of these sweeping changes on our climate and weather patterns on Earth. These changes include everything from rising temperatures to rising sea levels, droughts in places like the Middle East, and flooding in other places like Florida and the southern parts of the continental United States. So what does Exxon do? Well, they do a couple of things. One of the first things they do is they approach the Republican Party and they say, we have a proposition for you. We will give you unlimited money if you deregulate some of the protections on the environment for us. We'll give you whatever you want. We'll write a blank check. So this was in 1977 that this happened, around the end of Nixon's presidency. So in 1981, Ronald Reagan was sworn into office, and he serves 2 terms as president, and he does a lot of things that deregulate environmental protections in the U.S. One of the things he does is he weakens the Environmental Protection Agency. This is the agency in the United States government that's tasked with protecting our lands, protecting our water supplies, and protecting our air. So he deregulates pollution standards on all products made in the United States and products that are fit for consumers. This is for everything from cars to furniture. And he weakens 2 really important bills that were passed before his presidency, the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. Reagan ran on this grandiose idea of small government staying out of people's way and making a space where anyone could be successful because the government wasn't charging you really high taxes. But what he actually did was deregulate all of the things in place to protect us from large corporations and the effects that the oil industry has on the environment. So promised one thing, delivered another one. At the same time, during Reagan's presidency, the United States also propped up Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So Saddam Hussein is someone who, for a long time, helped the United States get cheap oil. Iraq and Iran and a lot of these Middle Eastern countries export oil as their main way of making money, right? I think Iraq's exports are made up of over 90% oil, right? So these are countries that mostly make money from oil. So all of this happens during Reagan's presidency. Following Reagan, if we fast forward to the year 2000, we have an election between then Vice President Al Gore from Tennessee and George Bush Jr. from Texas. Al Gore's campaign ran on an inconvenient truth, and that inconvenient truth was that our economy runs on oil. Until we switched to green energy, we were warming the planet and polluting it at the same time. And Al Gore wanted to fix that. George Bush Jr. was the son of an oil baron, George Bush Sr. They had no intentions of addressing climate change or fixing the environment. They weren't running on those issues. And Gore was. Gore saw the disaster that was the climate crisis, and he wanted to fix it. This was an incredibly close presidential race. It was so close that it came down to a couple districts or counties in Florida where the then Florida governor forced a hand recount in a couple of counties. So after the hand recounts, one of the first things that President George W. Bush does in office in his second week is create the National Energy Policy Development Group, the NEPDG. So the whole goal of this group was to come up with a solution for what to do on the U.S.'s heavy dependence on oil from the Middle East, because we needed oil. The Middle East was exporting cheap oil, but because we depended on them for oil, if relations ever fell through between the United States and Iraq or the United States and Iran, we were in hot water. Only a couple of months later, September 11th happens. George Bush declares war on Iraq. He claims weapons of mass destruction are located in Iraq. Those WMDs were never found. But what was found was oil. Iraq had lots and lots of cheap oil to export, and Bush knew this when he lied to the American people about invading Iraq and why he was doing it. The NEPDG never found a way to reduce the United States' dependency on oil, but what they did find is an excuse to invade it. The war lasted well into the 2010s and claimed thousands of lives of American troops and Iraqis' lives. It destabilized the surrounding countries of Afghanistan, Syria, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, and helped radicalize many of the governments all over the Middle East. Here we are now, in the year 2024, and we're faced with a very similar choice. We have a Democratic ticket similar to Al Gore in the year 2000. When Kamala Harris was California's Attorney General, she sued big oil companies like BP and ConocoPhillips, and she investigated ExxonMobil for its role in climate change disinformation. When she was in the Senate, she sponsored the Green New Deal resolution, which is trying to modernize the United States' energy grid to run on renewable energies like solar, wind, and hydroelectric energy. When Trump was asked the same question about what he would do about climate change, he said he will drill, baby, drill. Project 2025 wants to end the Environmental Protection Agency and kill clean air and water protections. All of these things are connected. The endless wars in the Middle East, the climate getting more unstable, and air and water quality going down. Even the war between Israel and Palestine is tied up in all this, because if the US didn't rely on oil from Iraq and Iran, they'd have no reason to support any war in the Middle East. Oil allowed us to get to where we are today. But we have to elect leaders who understand how dangerous it is to continue down the path we've been on for the last 45 years since Reagan took office. We need renewable energy, an energy grid that doesn't rely on crude oil from the Middle East or Russia, which only ends up costing them and us in the long run. It can and will happen when we elect Kamala Harris as our next president. This is why in every video I've done, I turn it over to you guys. Gen Z, you're going to decide this one. You're the deciding vote. If you care about Palestine, the Middle East, the climate, and your future, please vote for Kamala Harris. Vote for the candidate who is going to pass the Green New Deal, and I promise you, things will get better. In the meantime, as always, thank you for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.